You can almost feel it when you sit across from someone older or younger than you. Even if no one says a word, sometimes it shows up as calm steadiness, sometimes as emotional intensity that feels impossible to slow down, sometimes as independence so strong it almost feels like distance, and sometimes as exhaustion that no amount of sleep seems to fix. We usually call these personality differences. But what if there's something deeper? What if your nervous system is carrying history, not just memory? Today, we're walking through something most people never connect out loud. We're going to move through every generation, from the greatest generation all the way to the newest generations being born into AI and digital reality, and how each one quietly shaped how we love, cope, trust, argue, parent, and survive. Because once you see how emotional survival gets passed down, you start to understand yourself in a completely different way. Let's start with a question that feels almost impossible to imagine. What does childhood feel like when survival is never guaranteed? If you were part of the greatest generation, childhood meant watching stability collapse during the Great Depression. Imagine being young and watching your parents lose not just income, but certainty. Meals stretched across days, shoes passed down until your toes pressed against the front. Your nervous system learned something early. Safety comes from endurance. And just when adulthood arrived, World War II demanded everything again. When a generation grows up with repeated collective crisis, the brain adapts by prioritizing action over emotional processing. Feelings weren't absent. They were postponed. Resilience became identity. They didn't just survive hardship. They raised children inside that emotional survival language. So what happens when children grow up inside homes built by people who endured war and economic collapse? You get the silent generation. Imagine growing up watching adults carry stress they never explained. Radios delivering news about wars and political fear. Neighbors disappearing into military service or social suspicion during the Red Scare. When children learn that speaking loudly or standing out can create danger, the nervous system adapts by becoming cautious, observant, controlled. Silence wasn't emotional weakness. It was emotional intelligence for survival. They built stable careers, reliable marriages, predictable routines. Love often looked like consistency, responsibility, and protection. But emotional vulnerability remained quiet. When children grow up inside safety without emotional language, they often grow up searching for something they can't name. That search helped create the baby boomers. Now imagine being born into a world that suddenly looks hopeful. Expanding suburbs, televisions glowing with possibility, parents promising normalcy after decades of crisis. But underneath that optimism, their bodies were still absorbing fear. Duck and cover drills in school, assassinations broadcast into living rooms, the Vietnam War playing nightly during dinner. When hope and fear grow together, the nervous system develops contradiction. Boomers learn to believe in building the future, while also questioning authority. They protested social systems, redefined cultural norms, and built massive economic growth. But emotionally, many still carried the silent endurance modeled by their parents. Achievement often replaced vulnerability. And here's the transition few people talk about. Right between Boomers and Gen X, there was a generation watching all of this unfold without fully belonging. Generation Jones. Imagine being young enough to miss the cultural revolutions, but old enough to feel their consequences. Watching older siblings march for change while you quietly sat through political scandal, economic collapse, and rising inflation. This generation learned something psychologically powerful. The world can promise transformation and still deliver limitation. Their nervous systems became pragmatic, hopeful but cautious. They learned to rely on themselves quietly. And here's the hook that changes everything. When children grow up watching parents trust systems less, those children often learn to trust themselves more. That brings us to Generation X. Imagine coming home from school and the house is empty. Keys around your neck. Afternoons where you solve boredom, problems, and emotions alone. That kind of independence wires deeply into the body. Self-reliance becomes instinct. Freedom feels normal. Emotional support feels optional. But here's the part that hits hardest. Gen X didn't just grow up independent. They grew up watching relationships strain under pressure. They witnessed one of the first modern waves of divorce. They watched parents stay together out of obligation, or separate after years of silent tension. The nervous system stores those patterns carefully. It learns that love can exist without emotional closeness. It learns that survival sometimes means tolerating unhappiness. And here's the viral truth showing up decades later. Many Gen X adults are now experiencing rising late-life divorce, not because they don't value commitment, but because their bodies were trained to carry emotional stress silently. When life slows down later, when careers stabilize and children leave home, suppressed emotional exhaustion finally surfaces. From the outside, it looks sudden. Inside the nervous system, it's often years of unspoken needs finally asking to breathe. Now imagine growing up watching parents juggle independence, economic uncertainty, and shifting relationship roles. You get millennials. Millennials entered adulthood during terrorism, financial collapse, rising debt, and the explosion of social comparison through the internet. The nervous system adapted by becoming hyper-aware emotionally. Many millennials developed strong emotional vocabulary, therapy literacy, and a deep desire for communication and validation. When your brain constantly scans relationships for emotional safety, burnout often becomes the hidden cost. They don't overthink because they're fragile. They overthink because their brains were trained to monitor emotional stability constantly. And now we reach Generation Z. The first generation raised completely inside digital permanence. Imagine growing up knowing every mistake, every opinion, every identity exploration could be recorded and judged forever. The Gen Z nervous system adapted by becoming incredibly fast at reading emotional cues, social tone, and cultural shifts. Their empathy is often extraordinary. Their awareness is powerful. But their brains process more social data than any generation before them. When people say Gen Z is anxious, they're often describing emotional intelligence without enough rest. And now, we're entering territory no generation has ever experienced before. Generation Alpha is growing up watching parents openly discuss mental health, emotional regulation, and identity in ways never seen historically. But they're also growing up alongside artificial intelligence, rapid technological evolution, and blurred lines between digital and physical connection. Their nervous systems may develop extraordinary emotional vocabulary, while navigating a world changing faster than human psychology has ever adapted, and just beginning to arrive. Generation Beta will likely be born into fully integrated AI environments, augmented realities, and social systems that may redefine what identity and connection even mean. Their emotional survival strengths and blind spots are still being written in real time. Here's the psychology simplified truth connecting all of this. Endurance became silence. Silence became rebellion. Rebellion became independence. Independence became emotional awareness. And emotional awareness is now becoming emotional education in an AI-shaped world. None of these patterns are mistakes. They are survival intelligence passed through families, cultures, and nervous systems across time. And sometimes, conflict between generations isn't about values or personality. It's about different survival languages trying to understand each other. So I'm curious, when you look at your fears, your relationship patterns, your emotional reactions, which generation do you feel living inside your body the strongest? Share your experience in the comments. Your story might help someone understand themselves, or someone they love, in a way they never have before. And if this kind of psychology of everyday people helps you feel seen, understood, and less alone, gently like and subscribe. This space exists to make emotional behavior make sense, especially in a world changing faster than any generation has ever experienced.